Welcome to Uncle Jimmy's podcast. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the conversation.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Welcome into Uncle Jimmy's podcast. Get ready for a conversation that hits hard and leaves you thinking long after it ends. Today's guest is Christopher Rivers, a combat veteran who enlisted in the Army at just 17 right after 9/11 and went on to serve in the brutal theaters of Iraq and Afghanistan. After his first deployment, he didn't stop. He earned his commission through the United States Military Academy at West Point, returned to lead soldiers in combat again, and later pursued graduate studies in international relations and public policy at Georgetown University. But Chris's path didn't end with the uniform. He transitioned it into U.S. diplomacy, corporate strategy consulting, and even ran for state office in Connecticut, knocking on over 9,000 doors to listen directly to the people he wanted to represent. Through every chapter, from war zones to boardrooms to campaign trails, one truth kept surfacing. Hardworking Americans playing by the rules are still getting crushed by systems that feel rigged against them. That fire led him to write his powerful new book, You Shouldn't Have to Kill to Get Ahead, Reimagining Wealth, Power, and Belonging in America. It's part gripping memoir of service and survival, part unflinching, looking at leadership and belonging, and part bold blueprint for rebuilding a country where effort actually pays off and everyone has a real shot. Chris doesn't do partisan shouting matches. He brings raw honesty, clarity, and a hopeful, human-centered perspective that makes big issues feel personal and solvable. If you're tired of noise and ready for talk that actually matters, one that sees the struggle, honors the service, and dares to imagine better, you're in the right place. Chris Rivers, welcome to Uncle Jimmy's podcast.
Thank you for having me. And boy, is it fun to be having a conversation with someone who knows the sort of Boston hype and everything that goes into it.
It's so powerful, right? I met you today, and I'll say quite often throughout this, pod match, we connected, and I tell people, right, I'm getting to learn this new stuff here. So one of the things I have on the screen, if you're watching on YouTube, you're going to be able to click special guest Christopher Rivers, click on that. That's going to bring you to his website. Everything's there that you're going to need to know. We're going to bring that up on the show many times today, right? But so Chris, welcome in. I'm super excited to have you, right? And so you enlisted, right, at 17, right after 9/11.
Yep, that's right.
You came from a working class family, already struggling. What was the exact moment you decided the Army was your way out? And how did you feel like you were running towards something or away from something?
Growing up genuinely working class, and the type of working class where your dad is managing your family's budget by taking his old school paycheck down to the bank, depositing a certain amount, withdrawing a certain amount of cash, and that's the entire cash your family has for the entire week, right? It was $400 or whatever it was. And so if you wanted to go to McDonald's, or if you had a flat tire in your car, or someone had to go to the doctor all of a sudden, that meant that for that week, you maybe skipped the meal. You maybe didn't have the latest thing you needed for school, or some school trips were just out of bounds. And my family, I think they were really trying to protect us from it, but we never talked about money because we never had money to talk about. And yet, it's so much a force of guiding what your opportunities are. And growing up in Connecticut, which is one of the richest states, but also one of the most unequal states in the country to this day, you can grow up in the sort of forgotten factory town, and just a couple towns over, it's the richest town in the country. And it's just something you live every single day, and you get to see it as a kid. And so to get to your question, choosing to enlist in the Army, really, I made that choice when I was 16, 17 years old. I was a fat kid. I was like 250 pounds in 8th grade, 5 feet tall, extremely overweight. And I was just looking around, and I kind of saw my older brother and older sister, and they went to community college, didn't make it through because I felt like high school 2.0. And I was just looking around. As much as I love my family, I love my community, love my church environment, I also just thought there's more out there. Like, I have more in me. And I just wanted to go see what that would be like. But no one in my family had gone to college. No one knew even how to apply or how to take out student loans, or even if student loans were a good idea or not. And so 9/11 happens, and this sense of just an urge to want to help people led me to take my EMT certification course when I was still in high school. And then I loved doing that job so much that I also came across an Army National Guard recruiter who said, it really doesn't matter. You're overweight. You can lose the weight. It's a mindset thing. And she started taking me for runs. So I lost 65 pounds in 3 months. And I was like, oh, this is a whole new world. Let's go.
Let's go. Ready, right?
Let's go. Absolutely. And once you're in that mindset around people who aren't saying like, here's the limitations we have of how much money we have in our wallet, and starting being around people like, it's just a mindset shift, go for it. Then it becomes, how far do you want to go? And
Yeah.
so it's a combination of running away, but from some things maybe, but more running to the opportunity that I didn't know what the opportunity would look like. I just knew there was something out there. And to be frank, I enlisted in the National Guard in Connecticut thinking I can go to UConn. They could pay for my tuition at UConn. And then I would figure out what service meant after school. But that was also at the time National Guard soldiers started getting called up for Operation Iraqi Freedom and whatnot. And so my life took a detour. Instead of going to UConn, ended up going to Operation Iraqi Freedom, retook my SATs in Kuwait and applied for West Point. And so the opportunity was real. But boy, in the pre-social media age, pre-internet age, it was hard to know what was out there. It was almost like a leap of faith of just saying, there's something else out there and let me go figure out what that is. And maybe I'll just end up back here, right? That's the worst case scenario, most likely.
Yeah. So in your head, right, you're thinking like, okay, in a couple of years, I'll be at Stores, Connecticut, right, down at UConn, right? But here you are. You're on that plane, and where you going? Yeah, you're headed off to Afghanistan, right?
Yeah.
This isn't Stores, right? This isn't Stores, Connecticut as you land.
No,
So in those early days, right, in Afghanistan, you were leading soldiers as a young officer, right? Walk us through the darkest moment when you thought, this system is going to break me before I break it.
Yeah. So after West Point, when I was leading soldiers in Afghanistan, we were doing what's called route clearance. Route clearance, for those that don't know, is you're driving around at 2 miles per hour trying to find the buried explosive devices that are in the roads. It is the most boring job and the most terrifying job all at once because you're barely crawling along trying to stay awake. And then if you don't do your job well, you have your trucks getting blown up. And one of these missions, and our missions would last about 3 days into one of our missions, one of our trucks got blown up. All 3 soldiers who were in the truck got medevac. They all got back home. One lost a leg, another one broke a back. Like they were beat up. And I just remember for 27 days being outside the wire, the only American for 100 miles around. And my soldiers are asking me, why are we still here 10 years later? Because that was, by the time I enlisted and then went to West Point and then went back out into Afghanistan, it was 2011, 2012 timeframe. And I gave them as good of an answer as I possibly could, but it wasn't an answer that satisfied me. And that's when I realized, crap, studying physics and nuclear engineering at West Point was a great world-class education, but it didn't teach me how our government made decisions, how power politically really worked, how the international system is supposed to work. And so I don't know if I thought it was going to break me. I just knew if I kept going down the Army road and kept deployment after deployment, which I was doing at the time, I just wanted to understand why. Why were we throwing ourselves into solving these problems that felt very unsolvable? In trying to explain that back in DC, that seemed focused on anything but what we were actually doing, right? And that for me was a giant disconnect that I wanted to go study a bit more, just how all this stuff works. So that truck getting blown up was really the sort of pivotal moment for me to just say, I don't know what I don't know yet. I just know I want to go study it.
Yeah. So when the kid asked you that, right? How old is this kid? Do you remember? Young kid, 20s?
Yeah, the soldiers I was leading, 18, 19, 20 years old,
Yeah.
that age range.
Yeah.
And I was,
it's a very valid question though, right?
yeah. I mean, you take kids, young adults,
Yeah.
from
Kids,
all over the
though,
country.
you are right. They are kids, right?
Oh man, I enlisted when I was 17 and I was in Iraq when I was 18 years old. And I felt like I knew what I was doing back then. But back then, when someone was 25, they felt old. Or when someone was 35, they felt really old.
They were the seasoned veteran, right?
Yeah. Now that I'm a bit older and have several deployments, I go back and when I visit West Point or, when I go see young soldiers, like, man, they do look like kids. They're young. And at the end of the day, it's a life experience thing, right? Like combat ages you. And I don't think people appreciate how much combat can age you in sort of the mentality of how you view the world. But it also gives you this really amazing perspective of, I'm involved in local politics. I'm still involved with politics at all level. Politics can get heated. Politics can get nasty, but no one's shooting at me. No one's getting blown up. Like it's going to be okay.
Yeah.
We'll get through it. And it just resets the entire frame of reference. But yeah, going back to your question, these 18, 19, 20-year-old kids asking me as, by the way, a mid 20-year-old officer, hey, why are we still here? And looking at me like an authority on it. It's hard to wrap your head around when these young people who all enlisted or signed up to serve for dramatically different reasons, but we all love the country. We're all willing to go do hard work for the country. And yeah, different people want college paid for. Other people just want steady employment. But once you're in the theater, once you're in combat, all those reasons go out the window and you're just there for each other.
Yeah. Yeah. Look,
But
and
it's
like you
fair
said,
asking
right?
the question why.
Oh, sorry about that. You
That's all
know,
right.
I know you said, right, you gave the reasons, and some people, right, give the ultimate sacrifice, which is their life, right? Young kids, right? And I don't and I'm not saying this to make anybody feel bad, right? And I'm not. But look at the wars, right? Afghanistan, Iraq, right? And put it to the current state now of Iran, right? The unknown. Nobody knows what's going to happen there, right? We don't know if there's going to be boots on the ground. The current president doesn't even tell us why we're there or what the game plan is, right? Or Congress hasn't even, giving them the authority for the strikes, right? So as a kid, right, you said your first war zone 18 years old, right? The hottest part for me is thinking, and you see it in the military, right? You don't have millionaires and billionaire families fighting these wars, right? You have the middle class people, the poor, the kids from poor communities, the disadvantaged communities, right, that serve for all different reasons, right? But again, like you said, when you get into there, it doesn't matter who you're with, who you're in the foxhole with, who you're driving with, doing your missions, right? You guys are there as a team, you're there as a unit, you're there as together. But the biggest thing I think you said was you guys love this country, right? You love the country, and that's why people serve, and I thank you for that. That's a big thing to put on that uniform, right? And not just to go to one war zone, you went to two war zones. You were in Iraq, you were in Afghanistan, right? And that must have been powerful for you, right? Think about you were 18 in Iraq, right? And then you said, I think in your 20, 25, maybe 26 in Afghanistan.
Yeah, something in there. Yeah.
Yeah. So what is that, what going through your head? Did you ever think, hey, growing up in Connecticut, I'm going to be in Iraq and then Afghanistan? What does that feel like, right?
For those who don't know Connecticut culture, and I think this is generally true in New England at large, but correct me if you think I'm wrong here, Jimmy, but you kind of grow up in a 15, 30-minute bubble around you. If you drive more
Correct.
in that, it's a road trip. And
Yep.
especially back in the day before social media, like that was your entire world. Going up to Massachusetts or going to Boston or going to New York was an event. And that felt like something else entirely. And I couldn't, growing up, tell you where Iraq or Afghanistan were on a map. Neither could anyone in my family, neither could anyone in my larger community.
Yeah.
Oh, by the way, despite President Bush, before Iraq at least, he went on a year-long tour around the country to explain why we needed to go do what we did. Ultimately, based on false premises and faulty intelligence and whatnot, we learned a lot in hindsight. But he made a long case so that by the time it came around to us being there, most people knew what we were talking about. In Afghanistan, it was even more direct. We got attacked. Osama bin Laden orchestrated it. The Taliban was providing him safe harbor for a little while, or at least that's the story we're all told, right? We all
Yeah,
knew
exactly.
why the sacrifice was worth it because no one wanted to sit back and just let that happen without some response.
Yeah. And I say it all the time, right, Chris? I don't know if you remember this. One of the biggest vivid things I remember is George Bush on the pile, right, at 9/11, when he says, someone shouts, right, we can't hear you. And he says, well, the people that knock down these towers will hear me, right? And it was so powerful, right? I think about it all the time, and I don't say this to downplay the current president that we have, but I never thought George Bush would sound like a genius, right? You look at some of his press conferences and you're like, oh, he was funny, but he was genuine, right? Now we have the current president who you listen to and you're just like, okay, if I'm on Trump's team, right? If I ever worked for President Trump, which I probably wouldn't, and never would accept a job, but my thing would be, here you go. Here's your 10 lines. And then I would go out and just rip him off stage. Just let him say what he has to. Because once he starts going off the top, it's like, because you don't know what he's going to say. He's a loose cannon, right?
He's a loose cannon, but he's also not a loose cannon. I think too many people involved in politics at all levels kind of dismisses him for being a loose cannon. And I think one of the things that we all need to learn from him is he led a political movement and is leading a political movement that isn't based on what is he going to do with the power he's given. He's doing it based on come here and you can feel like you belong. If you feel like you've been forgotten about, if you feel like you've been talked down to for a long time. And I get that. I mean, I've talked to a lot of people running for office. People do feel left out. People feel like they have been forgotten and don't feel empowered. And he offered a way to belong to a political movement that kind of doesn't matter what it's all about. All that matters is the sort of identity of belonging to that group.
Yeah, that you're included.
That you're included. And too many politicians, whether you're the old school establishment Republicans who feel like a rare breed nowadays, or if you're on the Democratic side of things, I don't think enough of us have learned that lesson that we need to build movements where people feel like they belong.
Yeah.
Right? We can't police
Everybody's
all the
voice
language.
is heard.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. And I understand that fully, right? That you say that, and it is true, because you look at the MAGA movement, right? And you have it from some of the poorest states in this country, right? That support them, that bleed, the MAGA party. And that's powerful because, like you said, I think you hit it right on the head. The whole thing of being included, my voice matters, right? And for too long, everybody in this country should have a say, right? And again, I'm going to segue it back to the, Iran and Afghanistan, and you look at that, and now you have Iran, right? What do you think as someone that's been there, right? As someone that's seen war, what is next? What's next for Iran? Because for me, they talk about regime change, right? But for me, regime change has to come from within. It has to come from the people of Iran, right? It can't come from bombs. You can only kill so many, but it has to come from the people. The people have to go out and do it. There has to be an uprising, whether it's, in the streets and they're just protesting. But what do you think is next for Iran? Do you think that, because for me, all this bombing and everything, all that it leads to me is if the supreme leader, if Khamenei's family is still in charge, right? What's the difference? Because now you have a son who's in charge, whose dad's been killed, they said, who lost a leg, who may be in a coma, whose only son was killed, I believe. His mother's dead. What do you think's next for us then?
Couple points here before diving into what I think is next. One point is when you tend to bomb or attack a country, the way we were attacked in 9/11, by the way, what happens after that? What happened in America after 9/11? We never felt more united after that, regardless of all of our divides internally. And Malcolm Gladwell wrote this amazing book called The Bomber Mafia. You should definitely listen to on audio format. And he goes through this entire history of where we have gone from World War II to now about when you bomb another country, what you tend to do is actually make that country more reliant on their government that they have, whether it's good, bad, or indifferent, right?
Indifferent, yeah.
And what we ultimately already know that we have is a much more hardline supreme leader in Iran than what we had before. The supreme leader we had before, and by the way, the Iranian regime, terrible people doing mass atrocities to their own people. But the new supreme leader is even more hardline than the old guy. And we're attacking him. We just killed his dad. So what do you expect the likely response to be? Is an even more hardline response. And oh, by the way, the Iranian people were protesting weeks ago. And President Trump, egged them on saying, go do more of it. And then we offered no support, at least from what we could see publicly. Up to 30,000 of those protesters were killed by their own government. The people most likely to actually lead a new government, we kind of sat back and didn't support at the time. So what do I think we get from this is a more hardline regime. I think we just convince them that if this was about nuclear weapons, we just convince them they absolutely need one, because the idea that we would do this to North Korea seems like crazy talk, at least for now. But countries
the little rocket man over there, right, as Trump calls him.
And oh, by the way, what countries had weapons of mass destruction programs but gave them up? Ukraine had weapons of mass destruction, now invaded by Russia. Syria had weapons of mass destruction, torn apart from within. Libya had weapons of mass destruction. We bombed them within a generation. Iraq supposedly had weapons of mass destruction. They did have different programs over the years. We invaded within a decade or two of giving them up. So this just adds more to the empirical evidence of saying, hey, like if you're a regime and you're worried about someone taking you out, then you need weapons of mass destruction. If you don't have them, we're going to do the Venezuela model or now the Iranian model, because we're just going to do it. So I think, long story short, what this gets us all is a less safe, more uncertain world. Because, oh, by the way, we also just broke a whole bunch of international laws, both in Venezuela and in Iran now. And if you're China, let's say, or you're Russia, the leaders of those countries that we used to keep in check, saying international laws are the minimum standards that we all abide to. And yeah, sometimes we dance around it. Sometimes it gets complicated. It's hard to enforce it. But we at least had some set of standards. But now, why? Yeah. Why should they hold back at all?
Yeah, they don't apply to Trump in America, right? They don't apply to Israel.
Right. So that's where I think we're going with this. I genuinely hope I'm wrong, but I think you get a more hardline Iran. I think President Trump is probably looking for a way out of this entire quagmire. And I wouldn't be surprised a couple weeks from now if you find some excuse to say, mission complete, we're pulling back. And then we're left with a more hardline Iranian government with even less chance of it actually changing from within anytime soon.
You've studied it, and you've been in boardrooms, and you've been in the battlefield itself too, right? I think the common American is not ignorant. That's not the word I'm looking for, but I think they don't understand, right, that one of my biggest things is with Iran is they're the number one state sponsored for terrorism, right? People don't realize that. Everything that goes on, everything that funnels through Iran gets funneled through these proxies that attack Israel, whether they attack Israel and other countries, they're hell-bent on terrorism, right? They are the number one supporter of terrorism worldwide. And for me, it's like I'm stuck, right? I understand what they're trying to accomplish, but again, before any of that happens, you got to go to Congress, you got to get the approval, but you also have to make a game plan, right? Because it just seems like we're going to bomb the shit out of them and see what happens next.
Yeah. And I was a junior military officer when I was in the Army, but as an Army engineer, your entire job is to what we call prep the battlefield, where you want to know the sort of 2 or 3 ways this could all go and how it's all going to end before you actually commit yourself to taking action. And I guess the shorter version of my previous answer is, from what I see from my own experiences, I don't think we prepped the entire environment to actually have the outcome that we wanted in the first place. It seems like, from the public's perspective, that we just hit the big red military go button, expecting once you take out the leader, everything else would just crumble. And by the way, the sort of decapitation strike where everything else crumbled has happened in Libya and Syria and other countries, Iraq too, right? There are sort of strongman governments. I think one of the biggest miscalculations that historians are going to be talking about for years is this Iranian regime was layered. It was matrix. It was adaptable. And that was something that I think our military planners probably knew. And that's why you're hearing stories, I think, coming out about all the advice that Trump got to not do this.
Yeah. And he just went ahead with it anyways.
Because, yeah, I don't know why.
So I know you already mentioned it, right? After your first deployment, right, you went to West Point. Then you went back to coming back from combat to that structured high pressure environment, right? How did that transition from being in the war zone to classrooms mess with your head?
2 different ways to look at that same thing. One, it doesn't really matter if you get a C or D on a test. If you're going to live to the next day, it's going to be just fine. You'll figure it out. 2, like, genuinely, the opportunity to just go and learn, and that's your primary responsibility, was such a blessing after having so many life and death decisions in your hands. And then 3, the pressure to do that in an environment at West Point where they constantly give you 30 hours of work to do every 24 hours, but everyone's sort of in the same boat, was a sort of really great leadership experiment where you have to figure out how to lead your classmates, how to lead projects, how to lead in different formats, because peer leadership is the hardest form of leadership you'll ever practice, while you also have a crap ton of work to get done every single day. And it's that sort of pressure that ultimately molds you, but it's also the sort of pressure while you're there you just hate, because you just want to be able to sleep more than 4 hours in a given day, and you want to be able to be a college student, you want to be able to do your sport that everyone has to do, or wherever the case may be. But boy, that pressure cooker is such a game changer for the rest of your life, because once you get through it, nothing else that is thrown at you can even come close.
So what made you go to West Point? What made you, seek the higher education at West Point?
Yeah, so I had some really amazing officers when I was in the Army who said, what do you want to do? And I was just like, I want to impact soldiers. Because I have seen examples of great officers who can do a lot for their soldiers. And I've seen examples of really terrible officers who make their soldiers' lives incredibly difficult for no other reason than either incompetence or they just have different priorities or whatnot. And once you are a soldier and you see how much of a difference having an officer who is on some side of that spectrum, either really, really good or really, really bad, and the Army has enough people where they have officers and leaders across the entire spectrum, right? Well, one of my officers just said, well, stop complaining about the bad ones, go become a good one. And they actually got me an SAT study guide and arranged for me to take my test and had me take my SATs in Kuwait. And it was really that piece of advice from someone who was just like, stop complaining, go do something about it, that led me to actually applying. Yeah.
Yeah. That's powerful, right? And so I ask, I've had a couple of veterans on and I ask them all this time. So from your time in Iraq and Afghanistan, right? How were the people in Iraq and how were the people in Afghanistan?
These are people, when you realize, and coming from a Connecticut upbringing, a Christian upbringing, it's culture shock. It's a different language. It's a different way of interacting. Even back in the day, like men holding hands is so outside the norm, and just like seeing them walking down the street, you're like, what is going on here? And I know that makes me sound like a backward hick in the sort of 2026 sense, but when in the 90s, whatever, like you didn't know anything other than what you were born and raised around. And at the end of the day, what I've experienced in both Iraq, Afghanistan, and Kuwait too, is that people are people. That all those people, as crappy of a situation as they may have had at the moment, were doing the same things that you and I would do. They wanted to find a way to survive till tomorrow. They wanted to be out of harm's way. They wanted to be able to provide for their family. They wanted to be able to work and have a job that meant something. And at the end of the day, that's what we were able to connect on. And by the way, these folks know history way better than we do, especially for their region. And it's fascinating being able to sit down and talk to them about their own history, especially in Afghanistan. some of those tribal elders could tell you about when they were fighting the Soviets and then when they were fighting the Taliban in some cases. And then now they're supporting Taliban. Now they're fighting you. And they're just like
Yeah.
talking to you about this entire history. It's
So how was that, right? Sitting
fascinating.
down with the elders, right? The tribal elders. So I had a guy on who was a photographer in the Air Force, and he went to, high-end meetings and big meetings over in Afghanistan. He would tell me that the Afghani people, right, were remarkable, right? He said whenever we went in, they would have food, they would have tea for us. And he said they were, and he dealt with the tribal elders mostly. And he said they were really very intelligent people, but they were also welcoming. Right. Because I don't think you hear that in the news or in stories about people from Afghanistan. Right. You always hear basically like when I hear the stories, basically like everybody in Afghanistan is the Taliban. Right. Everybody hates America. But it's sort of when I hear these stories of people that have served over there, they talk about these great elders, these great people with, like you said, that are very intelligent. Right. That you actually sit down with. These aren't people that are trying to kill you every day. These are people that are just basically trying to survive. Right.
Yeah. And they're people who are, like you said, extremely intelligent, know their own history. And by the way, I think what you're describing in terms of hospitality, it's a tribal culture. And the part of Afghanistan I was in RC Southwest, and it was very Pashto heavy. And there's an entire honor code for the Pashtos called Pashto Wali. And it is an honor code that they live by. And part of it is providing for strangers or for travelers, because when you're traveling in the high desert and you come across an area, like the idea that you will need shelter from the desert is real for everyone. And it's part of the overall culture that once you say, I'm willing to give you shelter, you give them shelter, not just from the weather, but if people are out to get them or whatnot. And it's interesting to me because they take it so strong that as a young army officer, by the way, I taught myself Pashto so I can talk to them without a translator, which was rare.
That's
I
awesome.
read on the culture to be able to talk to them about their own culture. We as Americans could invoke that as well. So when the story I led off with sort of my truck getting blown up in Afghanistan, I sat down with the tribal elder the next day and basically said, hey, I'm entitled to take vengeance, revenge, eye for an eye sort of mentality. How about this? How about we just make sure that that doesn't happen again, and we can make sure that this road stays open for the next however long we were there for, about a week or so. And if that's true, then like I will consider this like kind of all even. Sure enough, for the next week, nothing happened in that area. And that's where I think us as Americans, sometimes our cultural ignorance, which I grew up with too, really comes back to bite us. If more of us would have like taken time to learn their culture, we would have, I think, realized we could have used it more. But it's also this amazing culture. And it's weird for me as a Christian too, to be in that environment and also be like, quite frankly, Jesus taught the same stuff, like
Yeah.
welcoming a stranger, providing food, all that stuff is also part of our Christian values. And when I was actually able to talk, I might get in trouble for this because when I was Army officer, separation church and state, very real. But when you're sitting down with these folks and they bring out food and you're just talking to them, sometimes they would ask questions about religion. And then I would tell them about mine. And the amount of similarities, for as much as we talk about Islamic extremism and extremism of all forms is bad and difficult, but every religion has it. And you know what? When you really dive into it, they're worried because the extremists that they have to live with that are becoming extreme are illiterate. They haven't actually read the Quran in the same way that people who are extreme for Christian reasons often haven't read the Bible, or at least not for themselves. And you get to have these amazing conversations with these folks. But, when you're back here in America, it's all covered as all very monolithic. They're all the Taliban. They're all one thing. And that couldn't be farther from the truth. Can't ignore the reality that the Taliban's in power in Afghanistan yet again.
No doubt
And
about it.
so like there is some elements to that, and how much can your average American really separate from your working life to be able to understand the intricacies of Afghanistan or world away. But yeah, they're people just like us, and they have differences and complexities, and it's complicated and it's fascinating all at the same time.
Did you like the food when they brought it to you? Was it good?
The like second mission I led with my platoon that I took over when we were in Afghanistan, I ended up sitting down and talking to a gas station owner. They brought out food, and my soldiers apparently took bets on whether or not that would make me sick, because the way that they serve food is sort of a big bowl and no utensils. You just reach in with your hand, your right hand, not your left, and you're just eating it. And it's like you're eating with the locals who like probably haven't been able to wash their hands with clean water for years. Not because they're, bad people. It's just you don't have water out in the middle of the desert all the time and whatnot. And sure enough, like the food, I mean, it's better than MREs, that's for sure. It was actually pretty freaking good most of the time. Sometimes does it get you sick as an American? Yeah, sure. But like anyone who's traveled knows that eating different food from what you normally eat sometimes gets you sick. And it's okay.
So who had better food though, Iraq or Afghanistan?
Northern Iraq is better because they had more, like Northern Iraq is still part of the old Silk Road, and they would have like fruits and veggies and melons and all this like interesting, more Mediterranean influence. Southern Iraq was a little more bland from what I remember. And then Afghanistan was more like if you wanted to eat food to keep you going, Afghanistan food was a really good blend of taste and like sustenance.
Yeah. No, because I always get the take, right? In like you said, it's better than eating the MREs, right?
But yeah,
So you saw combat, right? Then diplomacy, then corporate America. Across all three worlds, what single pattern kept repeating that made you realize the American dream bargain was broken for too many people?
the main theme that I saw over and over and over again is the sort of working class people who were the enlisted soldiers or the people who volunteered to serve that didn't have necessarily the same opportunities that, for lack of a better word, we'll call the political elites have, are just as talented, just as hardworking. There's really no difference between them and the CEOs in the boardrooms I met that are also, by the way, smart, intelligent people too. I really think the people who rise up to the top in our culture in America in the last couple decades, not saying they're not smart, not saying they're not intelligent, but it's not a true meritocracy. They're not competing with all Americans. And at the end of the day, I think sometimes that comes back to bite us in the butt. But at the end of the day, our country has so much freaking talent. And yet we built all these systems to not make it a fair competition where people can actually get to be whatever their talent and work ethic says that they should be able to become. And so I just think like the biggest myth we have in our country, at least, is this myth that we're a land of meritocracy. I just don't think that's true because I've been at every stage of that supposed meritocracy. And by the way, I've been successful at every stage of that meritocracy. And the people I've seen at every stage of that meritocracy are basically the same.
Yeah. Yeah. So what I get you're saying is, right, is not everyone has the fair chance, right?
That's exactly it. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's to break it down, right? And it's so true because, the people in this, the people that are millionaires and billionaires, right? They got the upper hand on us, the middle class. And look, I say it all the time. I get to go down. I'm lucky enough to get to go down to DC and fight for workers' rights and for my union. And it's one of the most powerfulest thing, right? But now to me, when it comes to politics, it's all about when's the check coming, right? When's the check coming? They're not worried about, Joe Blow during, a storm. They're not worried about Timmy down the street and his family because his aunt passed away. They're just worried about that check, right? It's become such a big business, politics has. And I think we were talking, we didn't record it, but we were talking off air. And that's one of the biggest things. I think if you take money out of politics, right, it opens the game. It opens the race for common day, everyday Americans to be able to go to DC and to change the policies, change everything that's going on down there. And I think as a society, we need to do that, but how do we do that? How is that possible?
Yeah, so my entire theory of change here, because I agree with you, that's the basic premise, right? And my theory of change is basically this. If we start to not look down our noses and actually learn lessons from how Trump has been running his political apparatus for a decade and realize that the days of just messaging your talking points to the half of the electorate you want to show up is actually causing more division and causing more people to not like anything about politics and actually switch to a politics where we're building movements where people feel like they can belong. And there's ways to do that. They're on the up and up where you're actually saying the truth and not lying all the time or whatever the complaint is for how Trump may or may not be doing it. There's a way to do it ethically. But we need to start there because in 2024, more people didn't vote than voted for either candidate. We had 93 million people in this country that did not vote. If you can convince 1 in 10 that there is something worth showing up to, that you can belong. And oh, by the way, it's worth the effort to actually show up to vote. You will change politics for a generation in this country. So that's the starting point. Once you actually build that movement, we as Americans for 4 decades, I think, have been promised change and we keep voting for change. Every presidential candidate who've won since the end of the Cold War has been the change candidate. The time to the time to promise it and then deliver is here. We can't just keep promising it and kicking the actual delivering of it down the road any further. And so once you build that movement where you can belong, then I think working class people would start to recognize, oh crap, we can use government to actually solve problems. And you look around and say like, actually, I want more of that, right? And I don't have all the answers, but like there's a whole bunch that we already know that would work better than what's working today. So start delivering for working class people in a way that would actually show up in their wallets, show up in their daily lives. And then that gives you the ability to actually take the entire system and fundamentally change it, to pass laws to get money out of politics, to pass laws to actually bring back a true progressive tax form, bring back laws that actually give people genuinely an opportunity to compete and limit the sort of monopolies and the big corporate overpower that we have and that makes up our current system. And so if you kind of do all of those three stages, build the movement that is built on belonging so people feel like they have a place to show up, actually deliver some initial results, and then use that momentum to fundamentally change systems, then I think you will create the sort of like next New Deal sort of age in our politics where everyone just says, all right, this is the new standard. And if you want to change that, you have to convince me it's worth changing.
Yeah. And I think now, right, in politics, you may agree or disagree, but I think everything's a blame game now, right? Like, how many times am I going to listen to Trump say, Joe Biden did this, or Joe Biden's not here, right? And I say it all the time, right? And I cast my vote for Kamala Harris. I would have voted for Joe Biden, and I say it, right? I'm so mad at the Democratic Party, right? I mean, Joe Biden himself, didn't have his fastball, but he ran and he won in 2020, right? And what are you going to do, right? Joe Biden, the guy that gave his whole life to this country, right? He served, was the vice president to one of my favorite presidents ever, Barack Obama, who I love. Then comes, 2016, they pass him over, right? He doesn't want to run for some reason. His son died. I think that was the reason. Then 2020 comes, the Democratic Party comes back to him and they say to him, hey, we need you, Joe. What does Joe do, right? Joe's at the end of his career. Joe could have sailed off into the sun and been good. What did Joe do for this country? He becomes president, right? He runs for president, he gets it. And then in 2024, he has that terrible debate performance and the Democratic Party throws him aside and says, here's Kamala Harris, right? I would have loved for the Democratic Party to stand on their own fucking 2 feet, excuse my language, and let Joe run and run it out. If he lost, he lost. If he won, he won, right? Because giving Kamala Harris was a disservice, 106 days or 116 days, whatever it was, to run a presidential campaign. It's never going to happen in this country. It's impossible, right? So that's my frustrations with the Democratic Party, which goes all the way back to 2016 when the Democratic Party was run by the Clintons and the Hillary got the nod over Bernie Sanders. I say it all the time. If Bernie Sanders was the Democratic candidate in 2016, you never would have had Donald Trump ever, right? So the Democratic Party's to blame. I say it all the time. And I'm a Democrat, right? I love the Democrats. I've voted straight down party lines my whole life. I'm in Boston. When I tell people this all the time, when I was a kid, when I turned 18, I didn't know how to vote or who to vote for. Well, my father was a union guy, so I came home and there was a list. This is who you're voting for, right? And I had no choice. And I didn't know the candidates, but Dad told me straight down the line, Democrats, if there's a D, vote for them. And that's how I went. But as I started, right, Chris, going down to D.C. and learning, right, growing up here in Boston, right, probably same as you in Connecticut. You always think the Republicans are bad people, right? Because I've been told that up here and I've seen, I've witnessed it with some of the candidates up here. When I got to DC, I found out there are great Republicans and there are great Democrats, right? Both sides have them, right? And there's shitty Republicans and shitty Democrats. But right now in America, right, 2026, what we need is for everyone to reach across the aisle, come together and start doing what's right, not for the big business and corporate sponsorships and all that, big pharma. It's time for them to do what's good for their constituents in their district, right? Stop fighting for the American public, right? Stop fighting for things that we need. No veteran should go, no veteran should be homeless. No veteran should go hungry. No kid in America, we can just spend, I think it was $5 or $4 billion in 100 hours in the beginning of the Iran war, the Operation Drop of Missiles. We can spend that, but we have kids in America going to bed hungry, living on the streets. It just doesn't sit right with me, right?
Yeah, I think I largely agree with your premise. I take a slightly different stance on, and I'm a Democrat. I have never voted straight party lines, by the way. I have always had someone that I was like, I like that person. And I get that not everyone does that. All good there. But I think when I look back at the sort of Joe Biden presidency and everything that led up to it, to everything you just walk through. One of the things that really frustrates me about particularly the National Democratic Party is we forgot what it means to be American. Like one of the things that what it means to be American is we freaking love competition. That's why our national baseball championship is a World Series. That's why we have the Super Bowl here. Like we love freaking to compete. And yet what we do in politics is we set up all these barriers to stop the competition. And I really think we fundamentally would have had a very different country if the Bernie Sanders Clinton primary was a little bit more just open and openly competitive. I think if more national Democrats, and by that I mean Democrats who have a national profile who could realistically make a challenge an incumbent president. I know it's sort of the traditional mindset to say, oh, that kills your future, but we were never meant to have career politicians in the first place.
Correct.
And if you're willing to just step out there and say, we can do better, I think we would all be in a better place. And by the way, I think we would have all seen that part of being a presidential candidate or being president for that matter is making good decisions and then communicating the crap out of them because we have a very large, complicated country it needs to be communicated to all the time. And I am on the side where I think most of Joe Biden's decisions were fairly sound. And I think the more you dig into the behind the scenes stuff, it's even more so. But he really didn't do a great job of communicating what was going on to the public at large, and certainly not as a candidate, even before that debate performance. And so I think there's genuine criticism to be had there. But I also go back to how many members of Congress haven't been primaried for decades? How many, and
Too
at the end of
many.
the day, too many. And one of the things I talk to people when I talk to them at their doors, we've heard, I think, probably for our entire lifetimes, like, why does it come down to these two choices? Why do I have to make this choice between two bad candidates for what most people talk about, right? And at the end of the day, if I could strain a sports analogy, we love baseball and we love to watch the minor league system and the players coming up in this country. In politics, if you don't vote for state offices and county offices and municipal offices, you're basically taking yourself out of the entire farm system of what people need to learn to be a candidate, to run campaigns, what to be able to say, how to say it, how to go out and talk to people, and even if it's for them in the first place, because honestly, doing this job well is a hard job to do. And so, yeah, at primaries, especially primaries for state offices, it's maybe 15-20% voter participation. And that's also part of the problem we have. Although, could we make these voting days holidays and do other stuff to make it easier for people to engage? We can and we should. But that kind of goes back to my point of people who've had power for a long time, politically speaking, really haven't been doing a good job on behalf of all of us to make the system more fair because, well, I'm sure they each have their own reasons, but I'm sure it's easy to just kind of stick with the system that you know. And if the system is based on fundraising, then, having a permanent fundraising machine in place sure makes it easy to keep doing the job that you're doing.
Yeah.
And so at the end of the day, is there blame on Democrats? There is. Is there also blame on Republicans for not standing up to what we're seeing earlier and more often? There absolutely is. There's plenty of blame to go around. But at the end of the day, one of the things I learned from the military days early on is it almost doesn't, it matters that you know how you got here so you know what the solutions are and aren't, but you own it. We all own it collectively now, and we all have to be part of the solution moving forward.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the big thing, the solution moving forward, right? For all of us. And I think, right, with Trump, right, one of the hottest things is he's just doing whatever he wants, right? With no checks and balances, right? Our government was created with 4 checks and balances, right? Checks and balances in place. And he's just showing you that almost basically what a king would look like if America had a king, right? And it's scary. It's scary because I often think of when his term is up, is he going to go? If, what's going to happen?
It's a scary time. It's also a time where I think he does pay attention to what people are paying attention to. And this kind of goes back to what I was just saying, we need more people to get involved. And we've done a terrible job in this country teaching civics and how this stuff actually works. And I get how people who get to our age or older or younger probably feel really nervous or apprehensive about getting involved for the first time at this point. Because what don't you know? And you don't want to look like an idiot. And I get all that. The thing I would say to people is this: you're not on your own. Someone in your circle knows a lot about politics. And just asking them questions, there's a lot of power that comes in just kind of recognizing that you don't know everything and just ask away. And I think you'll learn a whole lot. And I think we'll start sort of healing families. Most of us also have people on the other side of the political aisle in our friend circle, in our family circle that we haven't talked to because we haven't wanted to go there for years. And I think whether it's Epstein, Iran, tariffs, anything going on now, it opens up the door to have those conversations in a way that we weren't having for a couple years ago or over the last couple years. And I just encourage everyone, try it, have the conversation. It's okay to disagree and still be friends at the end of the day. But this sort of holding each other at arm's length and just allowing ourselves to think of each other as caricatures, whether it's true or not, isn't doing anything to solve any problem. And for me, that's what it all comes down to. Are we actually trying to work together to solve problems? Or do we just want to kind of keep pointing our fingers at each other and let the same problems get worse because they're not getting easier to solve?
No. And it seems like nowadays, right, with politics, it's the person that thinks they can shout the loudest, that's shouting the loudest has the greatest point, right? And I say it in politics for me. I love to have conversations with Democrats, Republicans, Independents, right? Because I'm open to people changing my mind, right? If you come to me and you have, hey, Trump did this. Okay, give me the reasons. Okay, wow. Okay, I never thought of that. Let me look into it. Okay, yeah, that was a right decision, right? But I can say that. I can listen to people, right? But like you said, there's too many families. There's too many, groups of friends. There's too many community groups that are all splintered now because everybody's taking a side and nobody wants to listen to the other side. And it's like, come on, everybody, open your ears, close your mouth, listen, and just have a conversation, have dialogue, right?
Have dialogue. And maybe this is one of the things that go back when you're at basic training as like a 17-year-old kid. and you're sharing a bunk with someone from Texas, and you're sharing someone in the bunk next to you is from Oklahoma, you're from Connecticut, someone else is from California. And all of a sudden you realize that like, oh, actually people who live in different parts of the country do have very different opinions. You can sit here in Connecticut and we have really small, medium-sized farms, for example. And you can say, oh, these large corporate farm subsidies are like a crime against our local farmers. And it's a terrible setup for small and medium farms. But there's also a reason why like so few farmers exist to feed so many people. And once you start talking to people who grew up on those large farms, you start to understand it's a little more complicated than you originally thought. And I just remember one of my friends used to tell me, the farther away you are from the problem, the easier it seems.
Yeah.
And
Exactly.
one of the things I've been advocating for over the last several years is get closer to the problem. Just ask questions about it, really dig into it. And I think it'll be illuminating why some of this stuff is so complicated. With that being said, if you start doing that and you realize some of the stuff or that you're hearing sounds crazy to you, some of the stuff going on right now in the country is freaking crazy. You're not alone.
So true. So in your book, right, you talk about killing to get ahead. Be brutally direct, right? What does that phrase really mean in today's America? And how have you personally felt forced to compromise your soul to move forward?
Oh, such a good question. So the title of the book really has three meanings intentionally, and it follows along with the three different sections of the book. And the first section of the book is my memoir part, because I wanted people to understand where I'm coming from. And I get into the sort of emotional details of what it means to take human life. I get really zoned into what that feels like, at least for me. I don't mean to speak for every veteran, for everyone who's been in that situation, but I also don't think veterans, and myself included, have done a good enough job telling other people what that weight is like for the rest of your life. And so when our government on our behalf, whether you like it or not, makes decisions to go launch military adventures elsewhere, I think more Americans should just understand what weight is being taken on their behalf. And so the first half of the book, while I'm proud of my military service, I wanted people just to understand that that path shouldn't have been the only path available for someone to become economically like moving up the ladder, right? So that's the first meaning of the book. The second meaning of the book is really pulling the curtain back on how our economic system actually works today, how our political system supports a very unfair economic system, and why we're all left to just blame each other, like we've been talking about on this podcast. And at the end of the day, what that has led to is an economic system where people are working 2.5 full-time jobs just to make ends meet. We have an economic system where people are literally working themselves to death just to get by. And the ideas that we can have it any other way seems, at least from popular culture that you'll hear on national media, is just kind of like work harder, it'll be fine. And yet with AI coming on board and the deaths of despair increasing and a whole bunch of other stuff happening, you kind of have to ask the question, does it have to be that way? And then the third meaning of the book is I try to lay out a whole set of solutions for how to actually solve our problems, because way too many political oriented books just say, here's the problem, I'm the answer, vote for me at some point in the future, right? And I could be totally wrong on these. I just wanted people to know there are technical policy solutions for almost every problem we have. It's not rocket science. But the thing that worries me the most is when I first started writing the book, I was watching polls that said 1 in 5 Americans thought we needed to use violence to correct our political direction as a country. And when I finished writing the book a year later, it was 1 in 3. And when you look back to the second half of the book, where you start to learn that the amount of economic inequality we have right now in the US is more than what led to the French Revolution, more than what led to the Great Depressions and World Wars and all of these like terrible things, is you kind of learn one thing. This amount of inequality will self-correct at some point, but the self-corrections are usually crazy bad. So bad that most Americans, I think, would have a hard time imagining how bad it would be. And the point I try to make in the third part of the book is we don't have to go there. We don't have to get violent to do this. We can actually just make better decisions by learning from our own past. And that's the sort of call to action of all of this, is as dark as it may be to go to war to get ahead, as dark as it may be for where we're at in this current moment in time, there are answers, and we just need to make better decisions, and we need to work together to make them. And if we do that, you can actually have a much better version of this future than any of us can currently imagine right now. And so that's the sort of call to action. Let's not go down the violent path. Let's just make better choices.
And Chris, where can people get the book?
Yeah, so the shortcut, go to chrisrivers.com. All the different places to buy the book are there. I also just released the audiobook, but you can find it on Amazon, you can find it on Barnes & Noble. Anywhere books are sold online, you can find the book there. But if you want the links to it, you can go to chrisrivers.com and it's all there for you.
Perfect. And everybody that's listening, if you're watching on YouTube, that link right there that I'm just putting up, special guest Christopher Rivers, if you click on that, that's going to bring you right to Chris's website. That will have everything right there. And we got plenty more to come. So I got many more questions. I'm so excited. I'm excited to have you on. I feel like this is one of those New England connections, right? Where we could talk for days and keep going, and we're going to. I usually tell people I usually try to keep this under an hour, but Chris, you've been so interesting. We have so much to get to still, right? If I have to, I'll break it up into 2 parts if you're okay with that. Because I want to keep the conversation flowing. I know some people like to keep it at a certain level, 1 hour, but my thing is we'll keep it to an hour. We can always put this into 2 episodes, part 1, part 2. If that's cool with you, we're going to keep going.
That's cool with me. In the Army, we say we train the standard, not the time.
So that takes me into the next one, right? You've led soldiers in war, right? What's the biggest leadership failures you witnessed or committed that taught you the system often rewards the wrong things?
2 things. When you act like you know everything and you really don't. And most of the time when you think you know everything, you really don't. So just never act like you know everything.
Did you see that a lot over there in the battlefield?
Yeah. The Army has this really weird structure where these young officers, and I was one at some point, are actually legally in charge of these 36 soldiers, and your senior soldiers have way more experience than you do. And they're actually part of their job is to help train you. But, you have different ways of becoming an officer. And when you go through the West Point route, like I did, you spent 4 years in military school. And you come out of that thinking, I've been living this life for 4 years. I know a thing or two. And you do know a thing or two, but you don't know 20 years of experience, a thing or two. And that's where like taking a bit of humble pie and just getting really good at asking questions and then letting the answers dictate what you do next, right? When you're a young officer walking around, just simple stuff like the motor pool, and these mechanics are working on all the big trucks that you've never seen in your life, but like you're supposed to know like how everything works. Just saying, like, hey, what are you doing? Why are you doing it? And when they give you some BS answer, it's a BS answer. Fine, then do something about it. But when they give you like a really crisp, hey, this is what I'm doing, this is what I'm doing, great, you just learned something new. Never stop learning. That's my biggest tip.
Well, and that's the biggest thing I think I'm getting from you, Chris, right, is ask questions, right? It's okay.
Yeah.
It feels
100%.
like as a society, right, we're often told, and you probably get, you probably got it in the military because I get it on the job site when I'm there sometimes, and I've been there 20 plus years, and I'll ask an old timer, and sometimes they'll say, go fuck yourself, right?
Yep.
And that's like, hey, that's the old timer. That's what he's going to give you, right? And then, he'll come back later on and he'll say, hey, this is how you're supposed to do it, X, Y, and Z, right? This, I was just having a bad day. And the old timers are always like that. But, when you go to the guy who's like, hey, can you show me how to do this? And they're like, yeah, you do A through Z and remember and then you get to like step C, right? And the guy has no clue. And you're like, you have no fucking clue what you're doing, do you? And he's like, no, So it's one of those, I love that where you're asking questions, right? Because I think as a society, we're always told, you should know the job, right? Because as a kid, right, 18, when you step on that battlefield, right, you trained for it, but you don't know what it's like, right? What was it like for you the first time bullets started, whizzing by your head? What was that like?
The best way I could describe it, the closest I've ever come outside of combat is when I first started skydiving, because what happens is what's called sensory overload. So much stuff is happening so outside your normal like plane of existence that and adrenaline and stuff starts happening. And so typically at least for me, I'll just speak from my one and only experience. I know firsthand inside my own brain, tunnel vision starts happening. Everything becomes robotic. It seems to slow down and your training takes over. And this is where one of the Army phrases of like, what you do in training is what you'll do in war, right? What you do in training is absolutely guiding you. And it's just muscle memory, because when you first get exposed to it, the ability for you to think through what you're doing isn't there. That comes with time and experience and more time in combat. And that's where, we can, if you want to, at some point talk about like gun laws in our own country when like we're talking about whether or not people should be able to have their own guns and like the very little amount of training that they have to have in order to own one. Boy, it's one thing to go to a range and squeeze off a few rounds with absolutely nothing on the line. It's another thing for someone actually to be an intruder into your home. And are you going to have the mental capacity to actually make that life and death decision? And oh, by the way, know if that round's going to go through the wall and hit a kid or anything else. It's something totally else. So at the end of the day, it's such a sort of out of body experience the first couple of times you do it. And everything just constricts. You can't see everything just physically because your blood is rushing so much. But the more you do it, and this is where if you spend any time around, and I was never special forces, but I got to spend some time around them and see them in action. They look so calm under all these crazy situations because they've been there a time or two and they train for it relentlessly, nonstop all the time. And so at the end of the day, I think we all need to give ourselves a little bit of slack too. Like when you're in an emergency situation, whether it's a car accident or something else, and you just like don't do anything, or you freeze up, or you act in a way you didn't expect, it's because you're not training for it, and it's okay.
Yeah.
But that's what it's really like. Like everything slows down and it's almost robotic in a sense. And you're just, thank goodness you train for it. And thank goodness you're around people who've experienced it before.
So the training automatically just kicks in.
Yep, 100%.
And you mentioned like slows down, right? So like you always see it in movies. It's like slow motion almost, right? Is it like that almost?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And like some of your senses will be heightened, other senses like hearing is hard in a battlefield because everything is so freaking loud.
Yeah.
And you're in theory, like you're told you're supposed to be wearing earplugs and whatnot. None of us actually do. Like you never know when it's about to kick off. So yeah.
So from enlisted grunt, right, to West Point grad to Georgetown scholar, right? Did climbing those ladders ever make you feel more distant from the working class roots you came from? Or did it sharpen your anger at the barriers others face?
It more sharpened my anger, not so much anger, chip on my shoulder, I think would be a better phrase. Because at the end of the day, one of the things that I think is a true blessing in my own life is one, I married my wife, who's an economics major at West Point, and she knew how money worked. And we were able to make investments in our married life to the point where, to be honest with you, like I'm certainly not living paycheck to paycheck anymore, but my entire family still is.
Yeah.
And I hang out with them and I spend time with them. And I also go to events in DC and like at diplomatic functions from all my old friends. And it is such different worlds and how people talk about money and the level of knowledge that people have. I mean, my dad just retired, I think 2 years ago, and he needed some help to set up his retirement account. And he didn't know what they all meant or he just didn't know how the money worked.
Yeah.
And then you go down to DC and you talk to people and they have this sense of like, oh, working class people just need to understand money better, which is sort of true. I agree with that. But then they're also actively working against more money for education to actually teach people how money works. So like that sort of hypocrisy of it all, or the sense of, oh, you just need to work harder, or hey, we got to the levels that we got to because we're just smarter than everyone else. It's like, no, you were born in the richest part of the country and had the best schools available.
Yeah.
You're not inherently smarter than everyone else. That's the sort of stuff that,
I say it all the time, right? And I don't mean to laugh, but Trump, right? Trump ran on the slogan of let's, make America great again. And I always say to myself, like, I wonder what it's like to be a billionaire who wants to make America great again. You came from the greatest America that there is, right? A billionaire, right? And I love it when he says like, oh, my dad gave me a small loan of like $100 million or whatever it was, right?
Yeah.
Like I was lucky if my dad gave me like $20 for the week for school, right? $20 was coming off out of the family budget for the week. And there was 7 of us at one point, 7. My cousin lived with us. My father adopted her. So there was 7 of us at one time, plus my mom and dad, 9 of us in the house, right? And it was hectic sometimes, not sometimes, all the time, right? And I say it all the time. I was lucky enough. My dad worked a union job and I was lucky enough to get, private education my whole career from, kindergarten all the way up to high school. I went to college a little bit. I had to pay on my own because my father said I spent $40,000 for you to go to high school, and I didn't get good grades because I didn't, apply myself. I was very lucky enough, right? I never thought of it until, recently. I was very lucky enough the way I grew up. I was privileged, right? I grew up in the city of Boston. My father had a great union job. We had a great support system with grandma and grandpa and aunts and uncles. Privilege, right? Growing up in the city, private school. Having a lot of opportunities that other kids didn't, right? And that's the big thing for me. And I followed in my father's footsteps. I do union work myself. And it's one of those things that, giving back and being able to be a voice, right, for the voiceless, as I like to say on the job site. And like you said, going down to DC, that if no one's ever been down there and you've never worked down there and gone to the Capitol, it can be a culture shock for some people when you're like, what is this, right? What are these people talking about? And DC is just another total beast in itself, It's totally different. So combat, right? Combat teaches emotional resilience, but transitioning out of the military often breaks people. Yeah. What was your lowest point in the civilian readjustment, and how close did you come to losing yourself?
I would say this. I lost myself in different ways. Coming out of Iraq, totally lost my faith. I regained it years later. That's a big part of me that I definitely lost for a while. Coming out of Afghanistan, one of the things that really hit me hard was I brought everyone home alive, which wasn't a guarantee to doing the work that we were doing, but not everyone came home in one piece. And that to this day is a tough pill to swallow. I don't know. I relived that moment and those decisions that led up to it a lot. We did a lot of dangerous crap in Afghanistan. If I was looking at someone else's record, I would say, you did a freaking great job. Looking at my own record, that's tough. And then coming out of it, or at least I, took for granted in the military how much a culture around mission-driven work and mission-driven purpose really points everyone in the same direction. And then all of a sudden you get out into the private sector and your worth is whatever you can negotiate. Your direction is whatever you want it to be. Even the choice of clothes that you get to wear every day is now all of a sudden sending a signal to everyone around you what you're all about, which is not something you had to worry about ever before. And it is so confusing. And oh, by the way, people who have been in the private sector the entire time just take it all for granted. When you were applying, like, what did you negotiate for? What do you mean negotiate? I could ask for more money? Like, this is so outside of my frame of reference. I don't even know where to begin. And that's the sort of stuff. And then people leaving their companies to go to other companies for a few grand here, a few grand there. And then, oh, by the way, the company is turning around and saying, we love all of our employees. And then as soon as there's one financial hiccup, oh, we're going to let half of you go.
Exactly.
And it's that sort of stuff that's just like, oh, it is everyone for themselves. And that is the hardest transition, I think, to make. And those I've seen in the veteran community who make it find some other way to have purpose in their life, whether it's through volunteering, whether it's finding mission-driven work out in the private or public sectors. There's ways to do it. For me, it's been part faith, part my wife has helped me through this, and part trying to find work that's genuinely about solving problems and helping people and not always chasing the biggest paycheck. I've chased big paychecks. I've gotten pretty decent paychecks along the way. It's soul crushing at the end of the day when you're doing work just because the paycheck is dictating you should be doing it.
Yeah. And that's the big thing, chasing the money. Everybody can chase money, right? So for you, right, and this isn't in my questions, but you just mentioned it, right? What was it like for you to lose your faith, right? How tough was that?
I mean, it's easy to lose faith. It's actually really fun to lose faith and not have the same sort of moral compass to go party and cut loose a little bit. That's what I think people who are in the faith don't talk about enough is sin is fun. It is. That's why it's sin in the first place. And the tough part wasn't so much losing faith. It was doing the work to regain it. And it was also, by the way, doing the work to tell people around you of where you're actually at. So much of Christians, I think, in America today, as much as it might be based on what Jesus taught, not just Christians, honestly, all the major faith groups. Part of it is certainly on what the morals and faith of that faith group are all about. But also a big part of it is just about having a community that you belong to. And at the end of the day, when I was a young kid in Connecticut growing up in the Episcopal Church, the church I grew up in, I loved and kind of feel like all of them are part of my extended family. But you can also go mentally into autopilot, stand, sit, recite the prayers that you recited 100 other times. It was just as much about having a group you belong to as it was about the overall faith journey. And telling that group that you're just not there anymore, that was the hard part.
So your book, right? It blends memoir with policy ideas.
Yeah.
What's one hard truth about wealth and power in America that most people aren't ready to hear but need to?
The basic stats I think everyone should hear is the median wage of American workers about 55 grand. If it would have kept up with productivity, it should be at least 90 grand. Everything around us should be at least 12% cheaper than it is right now. And all of that is going to corporate profits. And it's weird for me that we live in a country where there's an active conversation about government taxation being theft. And we at the federal level bring in about somewhere between $4 to $5 trillion of tax revenue, while corporate profits since the 1980s, when Reagan overhauled the entire system, to today have doubled. So to the tune where we're bringing in $4 trillion worth of profits. That's also tax. It's not a perfectly competitive market that we're operating in if companies are able to double their profit margins in 40 years. It's just not. And that money is going to some people, and those people are people that own stock. And that stock is owned more and more by fewer and fewer people. And that is, at the end of the day, you can hide behind a whole bunch of economic terms, which the finance industry and big bankers and big companies do. But when you pull it all back, we are quite literally asking people to work more hours, produce more per hour, and earn less per hour than our previous generation did, all while producing more wealth than any country in the history of this earth. And that is the uncomfortable truth. And once you understand that, then it leads to the second question, I think, which is, well, if we have a political system that's supposed to represent us collectively, and if you redefine working class people as I do to say anyone who has to work for a living, so you can have millionaires who are working class, don't get me wrong. If you have to work, if you can't just stop working today and live out the rest of your life in peace, you're working class, welcome. And to that group, you have to wonder, hey, if our government is truly representative, how is this really unequal economic system able to survive for 4 decades?
Yeah.
And the reality is we made money the source of politics. And that has been true now for many, many years. And that's why you don't see the change from Democrats you want to see. That's why Republicans will typically run on different ideas. And then when they're in office, they cut taxes for the rich is the first thing they do, which just makes our economy less stable, by the way. Right. And so at the end of the day, that's a sort of unholy alliance that we made with allowing big money to dictate way too much about what's going on in our country at any given time.
Yeah, I think it's Sheldon Whitehouse, right? Who's always talking about the dark money.
Yep.
And it's so true. If you, like we said, if you eliminate the money, it opens the politics up to everybody, and it would be so much better for all of us. So you emphasize, right, belonging as key to renewal. After years of service and seeing division up close, when did you last feel truly like you belonged somewhere, and what made it different?
Tough part of me answering that question is I actually feel like I belong in a lot of places. I still feel like I belong to my working class family. I'm still just that kid from Naugatuck that was trying to do something different. I also feel like put me in a veteran group, love talking to all my veteran friends. Definitely put me in a group of all the old soldiers I left, and we're going to party it up and have a good time. Put me in a group of diplomats, and I'm happy to be the diplomat. In fact, with everything going on with Iran, I've been talking to a lot of my former diplomatic friends trying to make sense of the international system. Put me in a room with dignitaries from around the world, and I'm happy to play that role. I think that all these different environments, you don't have to change who you are to fit to them, but they all offer you a glimpse from a slightly different way of what's really going on. And I love it all. That's at the end of the day, I'm just a freaking curious person. And so I really like to feel like I fit in to all these different environments. So one environment where I really miss the most. I grew up in a time where when I first joined the Army, traveling around the country as a practicing Christian before I lost my faith and then regained it, I can go into any church in the country and feel at home.
Yeah.
Nowadays, it's I don't know what the percentage is exactly, but you kind of have to do your homework on the church to make sure it's not going to be a rightward leaning, politically aligned church. And they're becoming more and more popular. And that's something that has really been a troubling development in my mind. But I don't understand when I'm sitting in a church, and I wrote about this in the book, and it's a perfectly sensible scripture-based sermon. And then all of a sudden the preacher stops, goes off scripts and talks about American tax policy. I'm sorry, Jesus did not talk about American tax policy. It's not in the Bible, but it's happening more and more often. We keep hearing it pop up more and more. And the evangelical Christian group is one of the largest voting blocks for MAGA and Trump. And that's one of the environments that I miss the most. I miss the opportunity to just travel the country. And whenever I'm traveling, to be able to hop into any church and feel like you have a place where you can immediately belong. And politics, faith-based groups have tried to influence politics. And I think a lot of what happened is politics ended up influencing the faith. And that is a troubling development that I really worry about.
Yeah, I think we need to get that out of the churches and, out of, faith groups and all that, and just focus on what we used to focus on. So in corporate strategy, right, in diplomacy, did you ever have to kill part of your integrity to advance? And looking back, would you do it again if you had to?
So the answer is no. I maybe didn't advance as much as I could have if I would have made some of those sacrifices. But the sacrifice I chose to make was doing harder work for longer hours to make whatever I was promising realistic. And to be just fair with clients of here's what is actually achievable and here's what isn't. And did I lose out to people who are willing to sell everything and never quite live up to it? Maybe. I don't know. I also felt like I made more than enough. And I think this is the sort of superpower you get when you grow up truly working class is you realize you can actually survive on very little. And the marginal gain you get for really pushing the envelope on what is, it's not even ethical, but just the higher level of ethics that I am used to, I'm just not going to break my honor. And West Point has this honor code. A cadet will not lie, cheat, steal, nor tolerate those who do. And there's rules around it. That's what I live by. And the same thing is true in politics. You can promise everyone anything. Very few people are actually going to hold you to account to it. I just don't feel like that's the right way to do business. So no, I never have given up sort of my ethical code to make a deal or advance in politics.
Oh, that's powerful. So the American dream, right? It feels dead to a lot of people. If you could sit with your 17-year-old self right now, what warning would you give him about the system he was about to enter?
The warning I would give him for the system he's about to enter is just to say, it's not a fair system. Don't pretend like it's going to be. If you do, your heart is just going to be broken because you're going to see so many people who are so freaking talented not be able to go anywhere because they were born in the wrong zip code, born and went to the wrong school district early on or wherever the case may be. And you will see genuinely smart people, but also absolute idiots be way above you in the hierarchy and whatnot because they were born in the right zip code and the right school districts and everything else. And you can't let that get to you because if you do, you will become extremely bitter and you'll just stop. And that's when the system wins. And if we want to try to change the system, the one thing you cannot do is stop. You just have to keep going.
Keep
And
pushing forward.
often, yeah, you have to push forward. And often the actual tipping point comes right before everyone else would have given up. Like, it's this weird thing to wrap your head around. I don't know exactly when the tipping point will come, but if you really want to change the system for everyone else, you got to push through it.
So leadership, right? Leadership in combat is a life or death. How has that shaped the way you view leadership in politics or business? And where do those worlds fall short?
So when you're making life and death decisions from a leader perspective, one of the things that you learn really quickly is you got to be able to put yourself into harm's way. And sometimes the harder thing to actually do is ask other people to go put themselves in harm's way for some vision that you have in your head but couldn't communicate to them. And you got to be willing to do whatever it is that they're doing. You're not always going to be in the position to do it, but you have to be willing to go there. Let's just skip over the corporate world for a second, because most corporate leaders have gone through some early days in their corporate lives where they were working long hours, whatnot, and they will say, hey, I've been there. Let's talk about politics for a second. How many politicians at the national level do we know today who actively put themselves in a situation where they can't afford to get sick, where they can't afford to have their job say, we can't pay you this week, where they can't afford to do something else? How many, like, there's no politician we have today. We have some politicians who came from that, but how many of them are saying, I'm not going to get paid until the people in my district get a fair salary?
Yeah.
We don't have a system that really allows for that to happen. So I'm being a little bit whatever. But at the end of the day, like, that's where the sort of leadership by example falls apart on its face. And that's where I think we've said it multiple times already on this show, but like, we need to get money out of politics. So more people who actually know what it's like to live that life every day, all day, need to be able to get in office so they can call BS when it comes up in these sort of committee hearings and everything else.
Yeah. Well, like I think people fail to realize, right, when the government shut down, federal workers aren't getting paid, but the politicians are getting paid.
100%.
That's so frustrating, right? Like I think you just had, I think I heard it today, and I could be wrong. I think it was 300 maybe TSA agents walked off the job today.
Yeah.
And think about that, what that could lead to for the economics of this country of if you just had every TSA worker just walked off the job tomorrow, all the airports would shut down. They wouldn't be able to work.
Yeah.
They wouldn't be able to operate. And these are people that people don't realize that aren't getting paid right now. There's a government shutdown. Some people aren't getting a paycheck. And like we talked about here, a lot of people still to this day are living paycheck to paycheck. So 3 weeks without a paycheck, the landlord's not going to care that the government shut down. The landlord wants his money, right? And the next thing you know, you're out of a house. The car gets repossessed. How are you getting to work now, right? The system is broken and we need to fix it. So Chris, for veterans listening, right, who feel stuck after service, what's the one practical step you wish someone had told you sooner to reclaim your purpose?
The answer is in the question: find your purpose. And your purpose does not have to be where you get your paycheck from. Purpose could be the faith group you're in. Purpose could be the volunteering you do. Purpose could be the family you're raising. Purpose could be the hobbies you have. Purpose could be a whole bunch of different things. For a while, when I was in the consulting world and I was doing consulting, one, because I love solving wicked problems. The other thing, my wife was still in the Army. And I didn't know if I'd have to move around the country with her or whatnot. And so big consulting firms offered the blend of being able to solve problems and also being big enough to be able to move around the country if needed. And at the end of the day, there were some consulting projects I took on that weren't that personally meaningful to me. There were some I took on that were truly meaningful. But boy, the opportunity to do volunteer work, the opportunity to belong to a faith group, the opportunity to have hobbies of people I connected with were just as important of a way to build purpose as my actual day job was. But for those of us who came out of the military, the day job was the purpose. And when you realize you can disconnect those two things, there's a whole lot more opportunities than you realize.
Perfect. So we got a couple more questions before we're going to end, right? So if getting ahead, right? If getting ahead shouldn't require killing your values or other chances, what does real success look like in your eyes today?
Real success means that, one, you're not afraid of failing. You're not afraid to trying something new. You're not afraid to lose your job because you're going to lose your healthcare benefits. You're not afraid of trying to go do something you're really passionate about just because you're not quite sure if it's going to work out. It also means that you should genuinely get paid what you're worth. Most of us, and let's just take teachers for example. Here in Connecticut, we have some of the highest paid teachers in the country. They are still being paid around 20% less than what the market rate is for a professional with a master's degree.
Oh, yeah.
And it just gets worse from there when you look at other parts of the country. And that's the thing that most people, I think, don't realize is in our current system, you don't get paid what you're worth. You get paid what other people think you're worth.
You're worth, yeah.
And I just think A big part of this is we need to go back to a country that is based on true competition. And oh, by the way, as much as we always talk about supply and demand for prices and stuff, same thing is true on the labor side, right? If there's a labor shortage, people should start getting paid more and then they'll start working for the different companies that can attract those workers. And that's fine. But whenever that happens, all of a sudden that's socialism,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's just like, wait a minute. If supply and demand works for setting our prices to get you your profits, it also works for labor too. And I think if we actually had a more fair, competitive, free market, people would be getting paid a whole lot more than they're getting paid now.
Yeah, that was like us here in our last contract, right? We had coach cleaners who cleaned the trains that were making less, less money, and we were able to get them. They went from 19 when we signed the contract. We got 5 years, 25%, which was unheard of, right? And we did a great job. We went against the company and fought them tooth and nail. But our biggest thing was we had coach cleaners who were making so little that they still qualified for state assistance, right? And on the first day we signed the contract, our coach cleaners went from 19 something an hour to 29 something an hour, which was, $400 a week, right? And life-changing money, right? For some people. That's a couple bills to be paid. That's $1,600 more a month, right? And that's not including overtime and all that. So one of the biggest things, like you said, is people knowing their worth, right? And actually going to the bosses and saying, that's the good thing about a union is we go to the bosses and we say, hey, we're not being paid what we deserve, right? Next contract comes up, we're going to get what we deserve, right? And we're going to fight them tooth and nail. And that's the great thing about the labor movement is I like to say it, we set the standard for the wages when it comes to working. And it's tough because, I've been doing this 20 years and it's one of those things where the system beats you down so much where it's like, sometimes you just want to throw your hands up and give up, right? But I say it all the time, like you said, once you throw your hands up and give up, that's where it all ends, right? And it gets worse from there. So you just got to keep pushing forward, keep moving, moving, and keep doing the best that you can. Because sometimes people just mistake, right? They mistake movement for action, right? But you really need action. Just because you're moving doesn't mean there's action going on.
Results matter. Sorry, can I just double down on that?
Exactly.
Results matter. You can't keep promising the same thing and not delivering results. And that is a message to all of our politicians out there. The other thing is you made the perfect point of your union and their contract. I think it should be illegal in this country for you to work a 40-hour work week and not have a living wage. And as much as there's a lot of amazing unions, there's also some unions who aren't as amazing. There's also Walmart, one of the largest employers in the country, full-time workers getting food stamps.
Yeah.
Why is the American taxpayer subsidizing full-time employment for any of these large mega corporations that are so freaking profitable? It is unreal.
Unreal.
And that's where if we need to figure out some sort of subsidies for mom and pop stores to like make this work for all levels of employers, I get it. But that's one of the things that as I peel the onion back and you just made me think of it, it kind of pisses me off that like my tax dollars are going to go subsidize Walmart.
Yeah.
Are you freaking kidding me?
Amazon as well.
Yep.
Two of the richest, Bezos and then the Walton family, I believe, that own Walmart. Two of the richest people, up there in the top 10 in the world. And it's the American taxpayer, right, footing the bill for these corporations, which is the big problem, right? But when it comes to the politicians, right, those two families right there, you've seen Bezos. Where was he? Front and center at Trump's inauguration, right? What does that say to you, right?
Yeah. Well, that and all this talk about AI disrupting the workplace, which is, by the way, real. It's happening already. It's going to be happening more so. What's the biggest lobby force in DC? It's big tech.
Yeah.
It's not coincidental.
Yeah. And I say it all the time, right? People, whether you want to believe it or not, I know a lot of people love Gavin Newsom in California, right? But do your research. Go look into Mr. Newsom, whether you like him or not. That's all I can say. He's tied into Silicon Valley and all that. So go look at it, because AI, like you said, is real. And AI on the transit side of things, where I am on the railroad side of things, it's going to change a lot of things, and we're going to fight them tooth and nail, especially in our industry when it comes to AI. I know down in New York City, they're doing it right now. They're talking about going to AI on certain trains and all that stuff. It's not going to work. You need human operators, and it's tough. So in politics, right, you ran for office, right? So running for office means exposing yourself to rejection daily, right? After 9,000 doors, right? What rejection hurt the most and what kept you knocking anyway?
The rejection that hurt the most was the one that was completely unfounded. And by that, I mean, if I, as a candidate, am putting multiple hours a day, by the way, on top of my full-time day job, to go out and talk to people, getting the door slammed in your face because they were watching Fox News and just reading whatever is said online and believing it like that is the new gospel. And they'll say something that's absolutely crazy sauce. And you just say, well, what about this? And they say, you're not informed. You don't know what you're talking about. Doors slammed in your face, but I know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And trying to run up against the messaging machine that is the sort of influencer roles that are following Trump and helping create his message, the Fox News of the world, is disappointing, because I think what people realize, and the MAGA voters I talked to who actually were open to having a conversation, what we realize, it all comes down to affordability. And like, is there enough to go around is underpinning the vast majority of this at the end of the day. It is bubbling up in different ways, but I get why people are angry. I get why people are feeling the way they're feeling and looking for something that was outside the normal to politics as usual. I get all of that. I disagree with their choice of answer, but we can have a real conversation about that. But when you can't even get there just because the social media rabbit hole has so consumed some people and some people are just straight up addicted to it, that just makes my heart bleed for people, because it's an addiction at the end of the day for a lot of people. And I have a lot of addicts in my own family, and I get how that can take over your life. And it's going to be really hard. And I think the intervention that we need as a country, we can't do through a policy decision. Like, we everyday people have to talk to our friends and families and like really talk this stuff through, because it requires such a high level of touch points that myself, who is running for office to actually try to solve these problems for folks, just couldn't get through in the 90 seconds I had at their door, because going up against 20 hours a day of their online addiction. And that's the part that like was really hurt the most.
So last question, right, Chris? Final gut check. After everything, right? War, West Point, Georgetown, campaigns, corporate life. If you could redesign the American system from scratch tomorrow, what's the first thing you'd burn down, and what would you build in its place?
Problem with that question for me is I'm immediately thinking of like 5 or 6 things and trying to get down to one. I really think the biggest gateway thing is getting money out of politics. If I could burn it down and redo it. Here in Connecticut, we have a system of publicly financed elections for state level offices. So when I was running for the state house, I had to raise $5,000. 150 people in my district had to donate. Once I hit those benchmarks, then the state wrote me a check for $36,000. And those amounts will change every single year. But my opponent, the Republican I ran against, got the same deal. If an independent wanted to run, they got the same deal, which meant that our ability to win over voters meant going to talk to voters. And I think while it's not the perfect system ever, it's a way better system than just me as a candidate dialing up rich people to try to raise more money to outspend the other side. I think that alone would allow you to do so much more, to actually do things that I would love to do from an economic system to this country. People don't realize, I think, enough that in the 90s, we made a decision to have most of our health insurance go from being nonprofit to for-profit, and people wonder why it's so expensive now.
Yeah.
People wonder why profits are going up so much and yet wages are actually going down. Well, it's because we made a decision back in the 80s to make shareholder supremacy basically the law of the land for how our economic system works. There's a lot of things we can do. Stock buybacks weren't legal before the 90s. And last year alone, there was $980 billion worth of stock buybacks. And that's the sort of stuff that just the only value it creates is for people who already own the stock, right? Clearly, that's not money that the corporate overlords actually need. I'd much rather see that money go to working class people. And we'll try to figure out how to keep the costs down so that, it's not all eaten away by inflation. But to be able to do all of that, I think we have to get money out of politics, because like we were saying before we actually hit record, the answer can't be for Democrats or for anyone who's trying to represent working class people. The answer cannot be the way I'm going to fight a bad guy with $1 billion is to go find a good guy with $1 billion. Because once you have $1 billion, your interests are just different than most working class people are. And there's good billionaires in this country. They're not all bad people. I get that. But at the end of the day, the incentive structures are just so out of whack. And the one thing to start over to actually make the system work for most people is getting money out of politics.
So as we close, right, Chris? Thank you. Thank you for serving this country in uniform, for leading through hell, for knocking on those 9,000 doors, and for writing a book that doesn't just diagnose the pain. It dares to prescribe real healing. You've given us a veteran's unfiltered truth, that hard work should still mean something, that belonging matters more than division, and that we don't have to tear each other down to build something better. To every listener feeling stuck, unseen, or betrayed by the system, Chris just showed you that one person who's been to the bottom and to the top can still believe in renewal. He's proof that clarity, honesty, and hope aren't naive. They're weapons. Chris Rivers, it's been an honor having you on Uncle Jimmy's podcast. Thank you for your service. all of it, and for reminding us we're not powerless. Keep fighting the good fight. We're grateful for you, brother.
And thank you for having me, and thank you for being part of this journey.
Awesome, brother. As I tell people before I go, right? You came on as a guest, now you're family. You're welcome back whenever you want to come on and talk and discuss things. And, you know, as I said throughout the thing, you people, when you see the guests, Chris Rivers, click that. That's going to bring you to his website. And I appreciate you coming on, brother, till we meet again.
Likewise.